going to talk briefly about China, very broad strokes on China, and then partnerships and how to work with partners. Then Mr. Kwok is going to go into more detail around the marketing and how to engage with your partners and how to work once you're in China. So I think I will kick off. Can I start with some questions? How many startups do we have here? Please raise your hand. How many startups? Okay, brilliant. Okay. How many medium-sized companies here? Medium? Okay. And large? Large. Okay. All right, so that's quite a broad scope. And can I ask, what are your first, just as a sort of mind burp, what are the first words, or the first word that comes into your head when you think of exporting to China? Just shout out the first word that comes into your head. Louder? Firewall. Okay, interesting. All right. Any more? Let's get some more. Opportunity. Okay, good. One more. Let's have one more. Language. Okay, language issues. Okay. I'm going to briefly cover some of those topics. I'm not going to touch firewall in too much detail, which you might understand because that's a more technical issue. So very briefly, for those who are maybe not familiar with the Department for International Trade, so we're underneath Dr. Liam Fox, who's our minister, and we are the commercial arm of the British government. So I live and work in Chongqing, which is in southwest China, and we work inside the consulate, and we work in the country, and of course with our colleagues in London and across the UK. We will work to support UK companies like yourselves of all sizes to ensure that you have a successful journey into China and of course around the world. Most of my time in Chongqing, I've lived in China now for 12 years, most of my time is spent in Chongqing nursing relationships with those powerful, good quality potential Chinese partners who are interested in partnering with the UK and importing UK products, nursing those relationships so that when we bring you to China on delegation visits, or when we bring the Chinese companies over to the UK, as we have done for this visit with 80 companies, we can then put you in contact with those companies. So DIT, among other things, has a very strong network in China, and we're here to help you. And that's really important. Please don't ever feel that because we're the government, we're inaccessible, you can't just send us an email. You absolutely can, and you really should tap into our services. My salary is paid for by you, the British taxpayers, as are all of DIT, and you really must tap in to our services. It's really important. I have an issue in Southwest China. I have a shortage of UK companies interested in my region. That's my problem that I have to deal with. So the more of you I speak to today, the more happy I am. Okay, so China's big. Pop quiz, what's the population of China? 1.3 billion, that's conservative. 1.4 billion maybe upwards. Who knows about all those unaccounted for farmers in the countryside. So yes, of course, China's massive. Some very quick stats. I know this is a cliche for you guys. Most of you know China is a massive opportunity already. That's not the issue. But here's some very quick statistics. 1.4 billion people, obviously a massive emerging middle class, 400 million by 2020, 240,000 preschools, 267,000 K-12 schools, 2,596 universities, and a little bit about my province. So I live in Chongqing. In Chongqing, which is basically a city, it's a municipality, 34 million people. That's half the population of the UK, just in my province in Chongqing, which I would imagine you've probably never even heard of. Sichuan, the province next to me, 82 million people. So obviously the numbers are massive. The market is massive. Or is it? It gets smaller once you start becoming focused. So I can imagine as companies, you're probably thinking, okay, I'm sold. China's fantastic, massive amount of market, massive opportunity, but where on earth do I start in such a huge country with such a massive cultural and obviously language gap? China gets smaller once you start looking at the regions. So hopefully by now you will know the East Coast cities, what we call the first tier cities, the major wealthy cities on the East Coast, which are Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, these are the first tier cities. So obviously they're, on first guess, they're a starting point for your access into China. They're more mature, they're more international, and they're more ready for foreign products, and they're easier to work with. My region, Chongqing, in the southwest China, I'm in second tier cities, so they're more up and coming. The appetite is vast, there's lots of money, but it's less easy to do business with second tier cities, but the rewards could be huge, and you could have a first mover advantage by looking at those cities that not everyone will automatically look at. And of course, East Coast first tier cities now are very mature markets, so the competition is intense. So it gets smaller also once you look at those companies that genuinely want to import foreign goods, that genuinely have the budget, that genuinely have the appetite. You'll meet a lot of time wasters. In my role with DIT and with my colleagues, we spend a lot of time filtering opportunities, getting rid of the time wasters, so that when we introduce them to UK businesses, they really understand how to work, and we know that they're of a decent quality. So there's a law change, and actually that's one difficulty about working with China. It's a very dynamic environment, and at any point Xi Jinping could change the whole market completely. Famously, with the alcohol market, suddenly Xi Jinping did a complete crackdown on luxury, and the luxury market was completely turned on its head. So this is one of the challenges of working in a dynamic environment like China, where you have to be flexible. Non-compulsory education changed last year, and it became less easy for foreign companies to get involved with the 9-year compulsory education period. That is from primary school right through to the end of middle school, up to the ages of 15, 16. It's become much more difficult for UK companies to gain access and get involved. They now have to work not for profit. They can't make a profit, which was a change the government introduced. The Chinese education system is incredibly rigid within those 9 years. It's something called the Gaokao and the Zhongkao, which is what the Chinese students are tested on. It's an incredibly rigid system. And of course, the Chinese government is incredibly protective of its 9-year compulsory education period. So for most of you sitting here today, you probably won't be looking at that 9-year compulsory education period. You want to be looking probably at preschool or after 16, or in free time outside of school hours, because it's very, very difficult to access. Good quality partners. Once you really cipher out the time wasters and the partners that don't really have the spending power, it becomes a lot less. So very quickly, for those of you who are not familiar with how China looks geographically, these are the first tier cities here. So it's on the East Coast. This is where a lot of the money is in China at the moment. This is the area I live and work in right here, just in the bottom of Sichuan. So I think another point to mention is it's understandable a lot of UK companies want to take their time with China. You want to think about it carefully, but actually China's moving really, really fast. And frankly speaking, I don't think in 2-3 years China is going to need our education technology as much as they do now. China's moving quickly. And I think many companies are becoming much more realistic now about how you work with China. Realistically, can you really survive long-term in China? More likely, they're going to take your tech, they're going to learn from it, and then they're going to push you out. That's quite likely. But that doesn't mean you can't make money in China. That doesn't mean you can't make money in the short term in China. Also, our partners, the partners we work with in China that we introduce to UK companies, often they want to move really fast. There's a myth circulating in Western countries about working with China that it happens really, really slowly and you have to spend loads of time nursing relationships. Well, that can be true. That's more true in the bureaucracy or in the state or with the government, but actually the businesses, they want to move really quickly. The businesses we work with, they want things to happen right now. And if the UK companies aren't fast enough to sign up the agreement and get things moving and get things done, if they're too slow, the opportunity passes by. So please don't presume that China will be incredibly slow. Often the opposite is true. They want to move really quickly, and you might be frightened by how quickly they want to push things through. So obviously, and it's a cliche, and I know it's not going to help you me saying this, but it is an incredibly different market. The Chinese consumer is incredibly different to the UK consumer. The first big difference is mobile phone usage. Most things happen through mobile phones in China. You've got big companies like Tencent, Baidu, the Chinese Google. These companies are defining new ways of how the Chinese market uses equipment. So don't presume you can copy and paste your knowledge from Western markets over to China. You probably can't. And that's why the partner is so important. And we're going to come to partnerships more later. So another cliche, but it's got to be said, China's massive, obviously. You can't look at it as one place. Each place within China has got its own distinct culture, its own different markets, its own environments, and of course its own government systems with varying ways in which the government will implement the law that comes from Beijing. So you can't look at China as one whole market, and you should choose carefully where you make your entry point and how you expand. And also when you're talking to your partners, you should choose carefully what network they have and where they can provide the strengths. So put in incredibly broad terms, there are 4 different potential education markets that you might be looking at. The easiest one, obviously for British companies, is to go and speak to the numerous foreign and British schools that are existing that cater for foreign nationals. The cultural differences will not be large. The schools will understand the principles of your technology. They will have the same or similar education content. Maybe they'll be doing IGCSE or A levels. So that's relatively easy. But of course the market is much smaller. So that might be a good starting point for your entry to China as you slowly familiarize yourself. Maybe this is in order of difficulty until we get to state education. International schools for the Chinese elite. So this is where a lot of the opportunity is and a lot of the money is. And a lot of the delegates here today will be representing international education in China for Chinese students. The parents have a lot of money. Parents in China are paying a lot to make sure their children get ahead. So looking at this market is an exciting market to look at, but the cultural differences will be larger. The partners, or if you work with the schools who are delivering international education, will be Chinese. They'll be thinking with a Chinese mindset. Their market, their students will be Chinese people. So they'll have to deliver in a Chinese way. So you need to look at how you can localize and how you can adapt for the differences in the market. I'm afraid I'd love to go into the distinct differences in the markets, but we just don't have time for that today. At least not for me. Maybe Ming will go into it. State education is, without doubt, the hardest part of the Chinese system to work with. Of course, it would be incredibly bureaucratic. The government is incredibly careful with what it accepts from outside international culture. So you'll need to spend a lot of time nursing relationships. You need to spend a lot of time in China. And you need to have your senior levels out in China, your CEOs and your directors working the relationships. Much more difficult. But of course, the benefits could be massive. Extracurricular, so there's a massive industry in China for education outside of the normal education hours, so evening schools, etc. That market would be more easy for you to access. There's a big appetite, especially to extend themselves outside of the rigid educational content provided by the Chinese system to make themselves a more creative country. So they're definitely going to appreciate opportunities outside of that system to work on their character and work on the holistic side of education. So, signs of a good partner. Now this is not a science, but I've just tried to give you some hints with a few of these bullet points. The worst thing, I urge you, I urge you not to do this. Do not receive an email from a Chinese partner, a random email, and then decide, oh, they look good, I'm going to go into business with them. I've seen that happen. I've seen big companies with big brands receive a random email and just start doing business in China. That is a terrible way to do it. You need to have a strategy. You need to speak to professionals who understand China. You need to speak to people like DIT, people like CBBC, the China British Business Council, the British Chambers. There's a whole network out there to help you understand China. People like Mr. Kwok, they understand China and they can offer you advice. Do not just go in cold. That's the worst thing you could do. So here are some signs of a good partner. previous success with foreign cooperation, if you do start looking at working with a partner, look at who they've worked with before. Have they worked with international companies? Because if you're the first foreign company they've ever worked with, there are going to be bigger cultural gaps and more opportunity for misunderstanding between how you do things. Now, in China, government is everything. As a mere civil servant in the UK, it's quite depressing when I compare myself to a Chinese civil servant. Unfortunately, my counterpart in China would be much more powerful than I am. Relationships with the government are very important in China. If you have a partner who is part of the government, attached to the government, or works with the government, then that is a sign that they're a powerful partner with a good network who can help you access the China market. Also, if they've worked with Tencent, or if they've worked with Baidu, if they're a big name that's recognized in the industry, or if they have partnerships with big names recognized in the industry, that's a hint that they're a good, strong partner, again, with a good, strong network. The cliche, network is everything in China. So needless to say, if they're listed, there's more chance they're a good quality company. If they're a Fortune 500 company, of course, more chance they're a good partner. Look at their business history. So look at what they've done. How long have they existed? Now, Chinese companies haven't existed for as long as UK companies. So if a Chinese company says they've been around for 15 years, that's not bad. That's really good in China. You can do background checks as well. China has its own company's house. You can actually go online. If you have somebody who can speak Chinese or understands Chinese, you can go online and check the financial background of a company. And there are lots of apps in China that can help you to do background checks without paying any sort of a fee. All you need is a Chinese speaker. Also, you can go onto Baidu, which is the Chinese version of Google, and do a search for your partner. Maybe there will be some rumors about them, or maybe their CEO has run away to Singapore because he's in trouble with the Chinese government. You can find out stuff like that just by doing a simple search on Baidu. So that just needs a native Chinese speaker or somebody who has excellent Chinese to check on the website. So be streetwise. We do get a lot of innocent UK companies who come out to China without really understanding that China's a much rougher environment to do business. I don't want to scare you by saying that, but the legal system is not so strong and transparent as it is in the UK. You've got complicated networks and relationships. It's a difficult environment to traverse. So you need to be streetwise when you come to China. How do you do that? Keep control. At any point in your partnership or in your relationship with a Chinese company, ask yourself, can they just steal this right now? What's keeping them from just ripping you off and running off and doing it in China without you? You need to keep control of your key resources so you can't be exploited in China. And that includes your network. If you hire someone in China that starts to develop a network with all the businesses, and you have no access to that network and you don't know who they're talking to, what's stopping that person from just taking your product, producing it in China themselves, now that they've established the network using your good brand or your foreign brand? You need to be careful about how you think about your resources and how much of your resource you give over. As I mentioned before, there's ways of doing thorough background checks on your partner. The best way, of course, is to get due diligence done on your Chinese partner. CBBC, the Chinese British Business Council, offer that as a service. They can do background checks on Chinese partnerships. So do contact us or contact CBBC if you'd like help to be referred to companies. There are good quality law firms, good quality consultants in China that understand China that can help you do due diligence. Frankly speaking, it's much harder to do due diligence in China because there's just not that level of transparency. That's true, but still there will be companies that can help you in China. Protect yourself on payment terms. Obviously, don't be naive about payments. Make sure that your contract is carefully worded and that the delivery of the money is only on receipt of the service, etc. Make sure that you don't put yourself in a situation where someone can just receive the money and then forget about the deal. Contracts don't have the weight that they do in the UK in China. It's more related to trust. And that's the reason why contacts are so important in China. That's the reason why networks are so important. There's less trust, there's less reliance on the legal system, and that's why trust becomes everything, and that's why you need to go out for dinners with your partners to understand them more. obviously you need to register your trademark, your intellectual property in China before you even think about going out there. I'm very careful when I go to exhibitions in China and I see UK companies exhibiting and I see the random Chinese people coming up taking loads of photos of all the material, and that's something you need to think about. That's something you need to be really careful about, and there's advice and there's guidance and there's lots of government support for giving you advice for free about how to protect your intellectual property, and that's very, very important. Before you even come out on a visit, you must make sure your IP is protected. And indeed, you might want to have a quick search on the Chinese internet. You might find your brand and your product is already being sold in China. That's happened before. So I've been speaking to a lot of companies today, and a lot of them will say, as I said at the start, yes, we want to go. Where do we start? What's the next thing? Literally, what is the next thing to do? What do I do next Monday once I know that I want to enter China? Well, I'm trying to give you some very simple tips with this slide on what you can do next Monday if you decide you want to do business in China. Number one, speak to us. I'll be here for today, for the whole of today, so feel free to come up to me and speak to me or speak to any of my colleagues. We'll be happy to offer you some basic advice. That's what DIT are here for. We do delegations, so we help UK companies come over to China. We work with BISA to do that. So you can speak to BISA, you can speak to us, ask what you can do to make your presence in China to be there. Of course, one of the big steps is coming over to China and seeing what the market's like and seeing what the reaction is like to your product. There's one big EdTech company that have got a great success story in China, and the way that they started their journey in China started with a delegation visit with DIT, and then a journalist in China spotted their product, wrote about it in the Chinese press, and then they started getting loads of interest and they found their partner. So you might be sitting on a gold mine. You might have that wonderful product that China really, really needs. So just by dipping your toe in the water, you'll be able to get a feel for whether your product or whether your service really would work in China. So speak to CBBC. So I mentioned CBBC, I think, twice in this presentation already. CBBC is the China British Business Council. They are a membership-based organisation, so they'll probably try and persuade you to become a member, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. That could really work for you. They deliver, some of their delivery would be free, so some things they can help you with without charging, and then other aspects of what CBBC do, they will charge you for, and they offer very good service. They've got over 60 years in China, and they can help. They're the delivery partner with DIT, so they're our partners. So by becoming a member of CBBC and working with CBBC, you'll be automatically also working with DIT, and that will be our pleasure to help. Obviously, you need to draw up a China strategy. I've spoken today briefly about the tier 1 cities, the tier 2 cities, the different regions, so start looking about where your product fits in. How vulnerable is your product or service to IP problems? Which market? Do you need a really developed market, or could you have a first mover advantage in a second tier city? That's some of the ways to start analysing and start making your preparations for a China strategy. Needless to say, you need to visit China. And of course, maybe at some point, your product will need to be localised. You might want to work with your partners to do that, or you might want to do that yourselves first so that you've got control of your localised product and then find a partner. That's something for you to consider when you're drawing up your strategy. I'm going to finish with the top of the slide. It is actually a Lauser quote that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. So next Monday, drop an email to me, come and get my business card, or drop an email to CBBC. You can find their website on Google. Go and visit, make that first step, and then we'll see you when you start your successful journey in China. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand over now to Mr. Kwok.
Good morning, everybody. It's nice to meeting all of you here. I would like to share with you of my 20 years experiences of distributing the digital products in China through various kinds of partners in China. So first of all, I would like to know, let's see. First of all, I would like to know what kind of Ed Tech you are in. Digital content, how many of them? Okay. Hardware? No, nothing. Furnitures, school furnitures? Nothing. Networking facilities? No. So schools? No. So mainly, schools, okay. So why I asking you that? Because actually reflected to, let's have a look with the kindergarten market composition. So if you look at this, probably Calvin just mentioned about the number of schools in China. So what I would like to point it out is like for the kindergarten in China, you can see, well, sorry for the formatting, 29% of the kindergarten, out of 240,000 are private, okay? For primary, you are talking roughly about 6% from out of 177. So the importance of this slide is telling us that when we are selling our digital products, if it is in kindergarten curriculum, so we can think a long term. Well, are we shall we focus in the private sectors? Because you know that probably Kevin just explained there are many bureaucratic practices in the government of propagating or selling your digital content, particularly in digital content. So when you try to sell your content in kindergarten, definitely I will suggest you think along, well, are we going to sell it to the private schools rather than the public sectors? That already composed of big, is huge numbers. So if you look at the kindergarten, probably you may be interested to see these figures. For 44% of the parents, they spend roughly about 2,000 to 5,000 RMB, which is about 200 pounds to 500 pounds per month, which is a very significant amount of money because you're looking at a huge number of families, okay? And you can see 40% also consume 100 pounds to 200 pounds of expenses in the monthly basis in providing trying to get the good quality education for their kids in China. So it means that 80% of the family, they spend more than 100 pounds per month in China in order to get those high quality products. Either at school or after school, they look for the tutoring centers and then trying to equip their kids. In what area? Languages, and also like music, dancing, and etc. Right? So this is a very significant market. So when you look at the age groups of the parents who purchase for their children, amazingly, you can see most of the parents are very young. It means that they're more free to choose. They like to choose rather than very stubborn and they don't want to change, just follow the tradition. No, most of them, in fact, you can see it's between the age of 25 to 30, and you got 29% below 24. So it opens a very good market to educate or to deliver your right messages to the young families, and they are very open. Okay, so these figures telling you that when you trying to formulate your marketing strategies, you have to think along. Okay, I go for the mass market and educating the families of what I'm going to sell and how good of my products to your children. Or should we think about, okay, we go for the government sectors and trying to lobby the government officers to adopt my products, I think which is very difficult, as Calvin already explained earlier in his talk, okay? So if you look at the junior, the K-12 education in the secondary market, well, you have about 9%, the junior secondary defined as grade 7 to grade 9, okay, comparing with the UK system. So the senior secondary is grade 10 onwards, up to university entrance examinations, okay? So you see, majority are government state schools. Then there are not so many run by private. However, the situations has been changed because, as you know, probably you know about the two-child policy has been adopted a year ago. And right now, the government could not afford to build so many schools by the government. So they have to open their policy to let the business people to build their own schools in order to catch up with the demand. The statistics told us that since they adopt the two-child policy, and last year I thought that the figures I remember, they have about 9 million children born in China, comparing with about 7 million. So that 2 million additional newborn babies do giving the government a pressure on providing the education. So it means that I am looking for a potential of, the government will need more business people to set up their schools. And it means that then, because the schools will be run privately, it means that they don't have too tight control on adopting like the resources, digital resources, or any other equipment or facilities, etc. Of course, we're still bound by the law, but the decision making will be the business people who run the schools. And the number surging up very fast. So if you look at the private school sectors, that is the figures that maybe you are interested. So by comparing the figures from 2012 to 2016, so the growth rate is huge from 14,000 schools in 2012, and then by 2016 is 17,000 schools. Sorry, maybe the file format doesn't correct, so it's just disallocated. However, at the moment, still lots of attention paid to the private kindergarten simply because newborn baby, they have to catching up with the newborn baby. However, you can foresee that for the elementary schools and then the secondary schools, the growth rate will be accelerated as the children grow up. Okay? So the market potential, I consider, well, it is the right time to think along it, and then how you get to prepare for this grooming market. And the other sector, you look at the international schools in China. So it's a very interesting market in China. When you look at the figures, but in 2012, which is about 5 years ago, so the total number is roughly about 400. But by 2016, it comes up to almost 800. You can't imagine within less than 5 years' time, it's just double the sizes. And by 2020, they are expecting at least 1,000 international schools in China. And of course, for running the international schools is not by the government. So it means that it opened another business opportunity for no matter you are in selling the school's equipment or you are providing digital content. So it gives you a good opportunity to get into these schools with their autonomy to purchase your products and services. So I give you a very general examples of right now what the Chinese government is doing. They are promoting the STEAM ecosystem. You heard about the STEM education, but they put A there to represent art. Okay, so they call STEAM education. So when at the moment there are a couple of local governments, they provide money to set up some pilot programs in various provinces, but most of them are in those tier 1 cities. So they fund the schools in order to develop this STEM or STEAM education in China. This is a quite significant move among schools in China because Calvin already mentioned about, particularly in senior secondary school, they all bound by Gaokao, the university examination. So the curriculum is very rigid, so it's not allowed to change. And they are not to change because the school head will be in trouble if in case that the Gaokao examinations, it turned up to be poor, then he will be fired. So it means that right now the government would make a move to promote the STEM to a certain extent that, think along, should we just focus the performance in Gaokao or should we encourage the students to do STEM? So right now they are running some pilot. But I think that at the end of the day, I guess, if you do have a very good STEM products or services, don't worry, because I think it will change the students' learning aptitude. It will motivate them to learn. I think once they have been motivated, I think they will excel in their examinations. So what it means is you need to show up, you need to make some pilot to demonstrate that these extracurricular activities in STEM or in STEAM or your products or services do help students to improve their performance in examinations. Okay? So this is sort of the ecosystem composed of schools, supporting institutes, and it covers. So even though right now you see these robots, toys, Internet of Things, 3D printers, stops, etc., in fact can be replaced by any other kinds of materials you can imagine, okay? So lastly, I just give some hints of how to get into the market from my experiences, okay? So when we get into China 20 years ago, and we used to invite schools for seminars, and providing that you do have good marketing materials, leaflet, video, to talk with those education bureau people, and then understand and let them to understand that you are providing high quality education solutions. Then they can arrange seminars and asking school heads or teachers to come along to listen to what you are saying. And once they buy your idea, then probably the schools will go back and then arrange the parents' meeting. Okay, so because in China, the school, suppose, cannot collect any fees from parents directly. So they will ask the company, okay, you do come to talk to our parents, and then you collect the money directly by yourself, but not us. But nowadays, it's much easier because you can use a WeChat to collect the money. So what you need to do is just to give them a WeChat QR code, and then they will pay directly, okay? And then you have to set the incentive schemes in a way that, like, I guess most companies, they do want to have free trial. But the thing is, once you spend so much effort in setting up all this free account, and of course, you do want to get your investment back. And very interesting, lots of companies, they fail to retain the free subscribers and let them to pay. Why? because there isn't any incentive mechanism when they first they try to market their materials. They didn't think about it, and they didn't talk with the local partner. Okay, how we structure our incentive schemes in order to retain those free trial users. And you need to give the schools those, how students progress using your products and services. And that's how, because the teachers, once they know that you are committed and trying to help them to improve their education quality, then they will encourage the students, okay, you go back home and try to do the online exercise or something like that, to encourage the students to stay online. So that is important. And obviously, many students, maybe, they couldn't catching up, like, for example, you provide online English program, then I think at least 70 to 80% of the students, they can't follow. And you need additional like tutorial services to support. That is what you need to request your local partner, how to organize this kind of structures in order to make your products be successful. Okay? So we had this all in place, and we are quite successful to retain the usage of the web-based materials 40%. And that is extremely important, because in most cases, people only talking about 3 to 5% of usage. So eventually they will not renew their subscriptions afterwards. So in our cases, we can retain the business for 40+% and with the usage of 40+%. So that is important. So lastly, when you think about the China market, as I said, you need to identify what is your target group? Parents, the government, kindergarten, or K-12, whatever. Then you need to identify in which areas your products probably be successful. As Kevin said, China is huge. You got tier 1 cities, tier 2 cities, and tier 3 cities. So for tier 1 cities, of course, the competition is very keen. But don't worry, even you go to tier 2 or tier 3 cities, the parents are very devoted and they spend a lot in their children's education as well. So if you think that tier 1 city may be too compact and too competitive, then you need to figure out, should you go to tier 2 and tier 3 cities? I don't advise to start in a very wide coverage of cities in China, because you won't be able to have a very good support before you learn the lesson. Then you just miss the market because of your support is not good enough. Then the users will leave and never come back anymore. So the local partners, what they need to do is the localization and marketing. For localization, I think that like if you are talking about English languages, you don't need to, because it's in English anyway. But if you are talking of other products, then you need to do the localization. However, bear in mind that when you do the localization, you have to make sure your IP right be protected, just Kevin already mentioned. Because maybe the British company worries after 2 or 3 years, you did some good in the market, you start to earn, and the 4th year, there is one company you never heard about, but they get all your similar, you get the products which is very similar to you, and then they roll it out, and you can't beat them anymore. So that is something that you have to bear in mind and to figure out when you do the localization, you need to find out the right partner, trust partner, your IP right, and that is extremely important to make you have a big success in the coming few years. So thank you very much. So I think it's time to me to stop here.